Hey guys, I know you think everything I do is epic, but this is truly going to be an epic video about Fritz Walther's personal sidearm. So you're not going to want to miss this. Okay, so this is Fritz Walther's MP. It's kind of like a Walther PP, but enlarged. Now, I know when I say enlarged PP, some of you get a little excited, but we're just going to move right along. It's an enlarged PP. It comes in 9mm. If we look at the left side first, you can see here on the logo that it has the standard Zelamelis logo, but underneath it, it does say caliber 9mm, model MP. So model MP would stand for military pistol, as opposed to the PP, which was police pistol. So this actually was a prototype intended for the military, and it never got past the developmental stage. They said they made, at least the book that I'm quoting, it says they probably made about 12 of these. This is number 8 because it's 5008. And it started with 5001. They made about 12, but only 6 were kept. So there's 6 in existence, and a few have shown up now and again on collectors' forums and things like that. This has been out there for a while because this is the gun that was taken from Fritz Walther's home in 1945. It was actually April 6th of 1945. This was taken from his home. And a quote from the book entitled Walther, a German Legend, it says in there, interviews with Fritz Walther after the war, he said this was his favorite sidearm and he'd love to shoot it. So that's some of the history, and this is the exact gun that was taken from his house. And if you say, you can't prove that, I'm going to. I'm going to prove it because we have the documents to show this came from Fritz Walther. And the story behind the gun is as exciting as the gun. So we did the left side. Notice the wooden grips. It's like a checkered wooden grip. Turn it over to the right side. You see the serial number 5008. You can also see the crown end proofs in the exact place that you would see them on a PP. Also, just like the PP, if we pull the slide back, it does hold open, and you can see the crown end proof on the end of the barrel, exactly like the Walther PP. To release the slide, there is not a slide release button, but you can pop the magazine and then it'll close and ready for fire. So it works in semi-automatic. I'm not going to slam the hammer down. Here's the magazine. It looks like it holds 8 shots. It looks a lot like a P38. And speaking of being a lot like a P38, so this did not win favor of the military. Again, the military was looking for an alternative to the German Luger. Everybody seemed to love the German Luger, but it was expensive. There was a lot of moving parts, and in mud and snow and rain, it didn't function as smoothly because it was a complicated design. So Walther, as well as Mauser and other companies, I'm sure, were trying to find an alternative for the German army. This was a prototype. It was not accepted, but evidently Fritz Walther liked the design a whole lot. This is also about 1926, 1928, so 10 years before the development of the P38. And as we know, in 1938, the German army did decide that they liked the design of the P38 better. And therefore, starting in 39, they started making P38s for the German military. First, they actually went to the Swedes. They had a Swedish contract. And then after that, by 1940, they were making them for the German army. And the rest is history. Now, let's tell the story of how this was actually captured by the U.S. Army. And I have some documents. You'll look over my shoulder and we'll take a look at some documents. But I find it an interesting story. Now, Carl Walther was Fritz's father. And Carl Walther was the one who started the Walther factory. But little known fact for a lot of us, Carl Walther only made mediocre rifles and shotguns. I say that because they weren't real popular. Some of the best work was being done by Krieghoff, and so Walther didn't really have a reputation for being the best of the world, not at that time. The eldest son, there was actually 5 brothers in the Walther factory, and the eldest brother turned out to be a firearms genius. He He was the first one that developed, and he had people helping him, of course, but he takes credit for having developed the semi-automatic pistols, starting with the small caliber, 25 calibers, models 1 through 9. Many of you know models 1 through 9. We've done videos on models 1 through 9. They were very popular, again, around the world, but it really exploded, not the gunpowder, the sales exploded with the development of the Walther PP first, and then the Walther PPK. It's only natural that they'd say, okay, can we get a 9mm, a bigger gun for the military, and let's take the PP and just make it larger. And so that was the story behind the idea of the development of this, and to point out that Fritz Walther was actually the genius behind the development of the Walther PP and PPK. Now, why were they so popular with the Germans? And they were popular around the world, but there were other designs that I think were just as good. So, for example, the Mauser HSC, I don't like that design as well, but Mauser was a legit company. They were making the Lugers at the time, and so you would think they would have an inroad in terms of, we're already friends with all the generals, we're already selling our product to the German army. Why wasn't the HSC picked up by the German officers for a small caliber 7.65 weapon? It wasn't. Then there's the Sauer 38H. I personally think it's a better design than the Walther PPK, but the point I wanted to make, not only was Fritz Walther a genius when it came to gun development, but he was a true politician. And we're going to see that throughout this story, how he was always on the winning side. He would endear himself to whoever was in charge, and he could read the tea leaves. He could see the rise of Nazism. He joined the party. I'm not saying that he wasn't a Nazi. I'm saying that he was an opportunist, and so he knew which side to choose. So the rise of the Nazi Party and Hitler in Germany, what he did is he ingratiated himself to all the Gauleiters, or group leaders, district leaders, the party leaders, and certainly to the higher ups. He would give away gold engraved presentation guns. We know Hitler on his 50th birthday got a gold engraved gun. Himmler had a lot of guns that he gave out. Fritz Sockel, we know, gave out a lot of guns. They were always Walthers. Now, I know from doing some Sauer videos that Sauer tried to cut into their business, and they went around and gave out all the SA group leaders got a couple free samples of guns. But Fritz Walther was much better at this. There is a section in Schindler's List where the main character, Schindler, it shows how he would go and visit like concentration camps. He was trying to get a labor force, and they were trading diamonds and jewelry and having parties, and there was a lot of cronyism back then. So not only is Nazi Party racist, but it's crony capitalism. There was a lot of overt and covert bribes that would go on, and the bottom line is Fritz Walther was able to make himself, he worked his way into the leadership of the Nazi Party, so much so, by the way, 1934, when about the time Hitler first came to power, 1934, the Nazi Party ordered 30,000 RZMs, 30,000 guns just for party members. So everybody everybody who wanted one got an RZM in 1934. When you joined the party, you could buy one as part of. You could actually buy one at a discounted rate from the Nazi Party, and it went on and on in terms of Luftwaffe contracts, police contracts, military contracts. So he has his brand firmly implanted into the lifeblood of the Nazi Party. Now what comes along is it looks like the war is coming to an end, and not in a good way for Fritz and his cronies. We have the Russians coming from the east, and fortunately for the Walther factory, Zella-Mehlis, it was not taken by the Russians. The Russians did take over that sector, and they basically cleaned out the factory. We had already cleaned out all the inventory, but they cleaned out the factory of all the equipment and machinery and then blew it all up. But I'm certainly not going to suggest that the American Army was benevolent when they came into Zella-Mehlis. But here's what happened that day. The American Army is approaching the city. It was the 90th Infantry Division and the 11th Armored Division is moving toward Zella-Mehlis. So the mayor of the town and Fritz Walther drive out to the outskirts, the entranceway or the gates of the city, and they stop the American Army, wave their hands, say, "We come in peace. we surrender, don't hurt anybody, we'll do whatever you say. They basically, the mayor and Fritz Walther, drive out, they meet the American army as they're coming into the city. And by the way, other cities did the same. I believe in Munich they did that, and you can read city after city. When I went to Germany, I raised my hand to the tour guide and I said, what happened to this city during the war? And they almost always would say, well, we were never pro-Nazi, but when the American army came, we welcomed them and we opened our gates. And that's true, many cities did. Certainly Berlin did not, but many cities did open their gates to the American army as they were coming in. The officers of the American army then took Fritz back to the factory, and they had orders to go in and kind of seize the factory. So Fritz went back to the factory. The mayor drove around the city with one of the American captains, and on a loudspeaker, he told everybody, surrender your weapons, don't fire any shots, just give up, come out and raise your hands, but most importantly, turn in all your weapons. And that's what they did when they entered most cities. They asked them to turn in all of their weapons. There's actually a quote that is in one of these affidavits that says, one of the American officers, he writes out, he said, as people were bringing us weapons, I never saw so many decorated, engraved, and beautiful weapons in my life. So the people of Zella-Mehlis all had really nice guns. The engravers were in town. There was presentation guns being worked on. So it was a treasure trove of beautiful weapons. It also says the first Americans, so the first ones that came in, they basically looted. They just were grabbing guns and sticking them in their pockets. And that was all the stuff laying out. They were grabbing guns, taking weapons. I don't know how long that lasted. Here's actually a letter. In a previous video, I wrote this letter of one of the GIs that was writing home. So actually, this was an interview that was written down with Sergeant Llewellyn, and he talks about coming into the factory, that they surrendered, and then he said, I took 7 pistols. These were PPs and PPKs. I took 7 pistols from the factory that day. He told me that he realized he couldn't carry them all. So he handed 5 of them over to tank guys, must have been from the 11th Armored Division. Sergeant Llewellyn was in the 90th Infantry, and he was handing out guns to the guys in the tanks. It was nice of him. He ended up with 2 that he put in his duffel bag to take home. He said later on, when he looked at one gun had been stolen, and so he was left with 1 more. He gives the serial number. I actually looked up that gun, and it would have been a Waffen PP from about 1943. So why it was in the factory, we're not sure, but it would have been a Waffen-proof PP that he brought home with him. But after an amount of time, I don't know if it was a day or two, rather than looting the place, they posted guards. There were sections where they did research and development. That was closed off. The OSS came in, because I have talked to GIs who were in the OSS and were in the factory at the end. And also elements of the G2, we'll hear about that in the sworn affidavit. So the intelligence division came in, and they were closing off research and development because they were interested in several things. They were interested in the development. They knew about the Sturmgewehr. I'm sure they captured some. We know Brad Pitt had one. But they were developing on the next generation of assault rifles. And of course, we know that the Sturmgewehr was the father of the future assault rifles. So they were looking at that. Secret weapons, guns that shot around the corner. They looked at those. Anything that Walther was developing. It was also said that they found miniature tanks that worked by remote control, so kind of like tank robots. And one of the things that really surprised me was they found remote control airplanes that could drop bombs, but I don't think they were ever operational. But basically, these were the predecessor of what we use today as drones. So the intelligence forces wanted to get in there, and they didn't want any looting going on in that part of the factory. But the guards, the armed guards, were basically there for a couple of reasons. One, they wanted to keep the factory workers from killing the bosses. They actually, that is a quote that I read, that they were there to protect the factory, but also to protect the Walther family and I guess the administration at Walther from being killed by the slave laborers that were there. So they were there just to keep the peace. And after that, GI still rolled in and rolled out, meaning different units came in. And when they came in, they were, what I'm told, they were allowed to get 2 guns. And they would keep one for themselves and maybe trade one or sell one when they got back to Paris or London. And that's why today we have so many GI bringbacks from the Walther factory. We sell them quite often, and they are favorite among collectors. So now let's get back to Fritz. So April 5th, Fritz is told to turn in all your personal weapons, and he said, well, they're not here, they're at my house. And it was late in the day of the 5th, and so the officer in charge said, we're coming to your house tomorrow, be prepared to turn in all your weapons, and he said, A-okay. They evidently did not think Fritz was a threat of any kind. I'm sure he was he probably spoke English, he probably was very charming, and I'll help you in any way I can. He knew how to read, again, he knew how to read the tea leaves. So on April 6th, the officers, as promised, showed up to pick up Fritz Walther's personal sidearms. And that's where we want to come and look at some of the documents. I hope you're enjoying this because I just love this story. Come check this out. It's going to blow you away. I just want to mention this book. We do have it available on our website, but a lot of the stories that I'm telling about what happened at the end at Zella Ellis and the factory, a lot of that comes from this book, which is just a history of the Walther factory. Carl, again, was the dad, but it was Fritz who was the leader of the factory during the war. On page 124, it mentions Fritz Walther's personal MP, and there's the serial number, taken from him by American officers. We're going to talk about that. And that was sold at Morphy's auction as actually James Julia auction, and Morphy's later took over James Julia. But it came from Geoffrey Sturgis, and he was a famous British collector, now lives in Switzerland, and I actually spoke to him about this gun, and he verified the story as told to me. There's also, this is kind of smudged and all, but this is part of the affidavit from Captain Clemens Werner, oh, it's not German, it's American, so Werner, Captain Werner of the G2 headquarters, that's the military intelligence. He does most of the writing. He is the one that personally took the guns from Fritz. But this is him talking about it. He says, during the interrogations of Fritz Walther, president of the Walther factory in Zella Ellis, this is where he told Fritz Walther that he had not yet turned in his personal guns and equipment at the home that day. Thereupon, the captain told him, that's Captain Werner, told him to go home, and they would come back the next day to pick up those items. He names names here. The driver of the Jeep, so Captain Werner and Master Sergeant Robert Schnell, we have a sworn affidavit from him verifying everything in this story. And then there's a couple other people. Slagden, we have a sworn affidavit from him because he took one of the rifles. And then Major Henry Douglas, also of the G2, that was his superior, that was Werner's superior officer. He also picked up a rifle that day. One of the quotes that I said, this is Sladen, William Sladen. I mentioned this quote, if you look at the last line, upon arrival there, as it was customary, we ordered all weapons and cameras to be turned in. I guess they like cameras too. I've never seen so many fancy and curious types of firearms in my life. So that was one of the G2 officers that went into the factory in Zella Ellis picking up weapons. Now, one interesting side note. So this is the affidavit of the main character in this book is Captain Werner, again, intelligence officer. 11th Armored Division, I mentioned them. They came into the factory on the 5th. They told Fritz that they were going to go to his house the next day. Fritz's handwritten, it was blank because I think when he did this affidavit, he couldn't remember the first name. Remember, there were 5 Walther brothers. He probably met all 5 of them and couldn't remember his name. So they left it blank, and then later, he does mention the name Fritz, interrogation over here, but here in this affidavit, it is blank. So he talked about, Fritz said, yeah, I've got some guns back at home. He says, I'll see you there in the morning. The morning of April 6, 1945, here's the driver. He took him over. They loaded up the Jeep with rifles, pistols, knives, swords. as he had intended to turn them in the previous day, but had not accomplished that. So Fritz intended to turn them in the day before, but actually turned them in the morning of the 6th. Now, this talks about what he picked up, and then he actually names the names of people who took things. Here's Sladen. I mentioned him. He picked up a rifle. I think he picked up a shotgun. And it just goes through in detail what happened that morning. Now, Exhibit A then is everything that they loaded up. Unfortunately, this is handwritten here, but we're going to see the detail here in a minute. This number 11, so these are all the guns that they picked up from Fritz Walther. This completes the articles from Fritz Walther's home. It's also something signed by Bob Simpson, because when Sturgis bought everything overseas, Simpson handled the export of all of the items to the Sturgis collection, and then Sturgis sold them through the James Julia auction some years ago. But going back to the list, you can see Walther PPK, a Walther PP, an Olympia pistol, 22 caliber, and then you see the MP, which is the pistol that I'm showing you. Also interesting, a couple of Mausers, Mauser stock, there was a Mauser pistol, swords and things like that. But let's go to the detail. This is going to be fascinating because some of these items may still come to light. Here's item number 1. This coincides through 1 through about 13 are pistols, and then the rest are accessories. There's actually an air gun in here too. So number 1 was an over-under rifle. And it talks about the over-under rifle. Number 2, side-by-side shotgun, 24-inch barrel. It gives the detail about that. Here's a double rifle side-by-side, so a side-by-side rifle. Not all Walther products. It gives the serial number here, tells the condition of the gun. Number 4 is a drilling. It talks about it being engraved, elk, deer, fox, quail. Talks about this drilling. It means these are out there, guys. You just have to find out who owns them. And then money whip them. You know, you got to money whip people when you want to buy this stuff. Okay, then there's another drilling here and gives a serial number. Here's a steyr. Why he had a steyr, I don't know. Describes the steyr. Number 7 is a Walther Model 9. Here's what they look like. It's a little baby pistol. Here's the serial number of it. The finish is in the white, so it would look nickeled. And it talked about the medallions. This gun is 99% like new. So that's out there if you can find it, or let me know. Number 8, I have that circled because a guy I talked to has this pistol. This is a Walther PPK, one of the last ones made. So 431 is the last of the PPKs from 1944. This one is like 100% condition, and that is a known gun. It'll become available hopefully someday. Then we have an Olympia, which is a target pistol. Well, here's an Olympia, what they look like. This one is actually mismatched because it says the slide is this number and the frame is this number. And it's 100% like new condition. Number 10 is the pistol that I just showed you. The Walther Model MP comes in 9mm, and there's the serial number right there. It's a 99% gun. I'm going to disagree. I think it's 98. Then it talks about an air pistol, another Olympia target pistol from 1944. Oh, it has an inscription. Evidently, it was used as a shooter prize, and again, Walther provided a lot of the shooter prizes throughout the war, and that's why you get so many presentation Walthers, engraved Walthers. Collecting Walthers is so much fun because not only is there a lot of variety, but they did a lot of fancy schmancy presentation guns. There's a broom handle with a serial number, so he also had a Mauser broom handle. I guess he wanted to test out the competition. Then he had miniature rifles and pistols. Talks about them. Then he had swords, a sword, and 2 Nazi daggers. This completes the list. So I have to chuckle a little bit to myself because whenever I tell a story behind a gun, people write in the comments, buy the gun, not the story. In this case, you're buying the gun and the story because this is well documented, sworn affidavits by U.S. officers, intelligence officers, that these guns came from the home of Fritz Walther. And this one in particular, serial number 5008, was the personal weapon of Fritz Walther, and he said it was his favorite gun to shoot. Okay, I hope I wasn't too long-winded. Some of you say I could listen to you all day. Others say shut up and get to the point. I hope you enjoyed that. I loved bringing it to you. For now, I'm going to hold on to this pistol. I absolutely love it, and I love the history. So make sure you like and subscribe to this channel. You know, one day everything's for sale, so you never know what's going to be offered, and you might want to be watching one day when this becomes available.